Hey guys, today we're going to open the new one for you, and I hope you enjoy it. Well, our story already begins with Fenger. Fenger was our protagonist, the emperor of the game. However, he ended up crossing the virtual game with the virtual world where he spent most of his time playing. He was basically skilled at everything, but there were various types of different skills. However, Fenger's skill type was a bit different from the common ones because he could draw his opponent's skills in a common way. But here, the action took place in the kingdom of Kai, where our protagonist fought with the nervous monster. But he, who was just a simple mortal, wondered why he had to be fighting something superior to him. But there was no time to think, because that shadow there, that nerve, started to track our MC, but he didn't take a step back. With just a punch, he managed to drag that monster to another dimension. Our protagonist completely broke it, able to break with a punch that thing that had just appeared in front of him. That thing started to form into a type of aura in front of him. A ball of aura appeared in front of him. But well, like all the monsters he fought, this one would be no different. He would end the creature's game as quickly as possible. That ball of nerve in front of him, he put it in his palm. With a simple handshake, our protagonist managed to crush that ball of nerve that was in front of him, sending it flying. After sending it to who knows what dimension, our MC realized that his powers were getting stronger. But in that same dimension that our protagonist was in, a voice appeared. This voice was already surprised by our MC because our boy managed to destroy the nervous soldier. A powerful thing. Then he simply asked himself if it was a certain Yugu who sent our MC. However, what he thought was completely wrong because he might have confused some things. He had just arrived here and he knew nothing. He then interrupted him, saying that this was ridiculous because the abandoned Valley of God had not yet been opened. So if it wasn't Ango who sent him here, how did he get here? But after some conversations, we were already introduced to this guy. This was Shin Hai, and he was someone from the abandoned Valley of God. However, he didn't want to talk. He asked for more explanations and details about how he managed to get here. So he raised his hand again and invoked two of those nervous statues again. Meanwhile, he kept asking himself what sector and what place this was and what name he had. Our protagonist stood still, thinking about what was happening because even if he explained everything that happened, he wouldn't believe it. Thania, this was the name of our protagonist. He was just a popular guy in his world who lived playing and was also named the Emperor of the game. But unlike us, he had a stroke of bad luck because due to a mistake that happened on his cell phone, he ended up being sent into the game he was playing. But okay, after that, the scene is cut to another place. Travessa. This was a new little place that our protagonist, he was reincarnated well in a place in a very scary forest. Since there, he realizes that there are several little animals there that didn't like our protagonist as a kind of visitor and were always willing to expel him at any moment. But he didn't leave but sometimes he had to, because a herd of spiders tried to catch our protagonist, but he ran. He wasn't caught. However, at the moment, our protagonist, a body strength X and 0 energy, and he ran 50 meters in 12 seconds, and he ended up being caught. He couldn't run, and at the moment he ended up dying there. However, he died at 18 years old. However, this would be just for extras. This was not for our MC. He then gets up, and with a slap, our prota kills a herd of those spiders, sending those spiders flying. However, this world is still very crazy. After he killed those spiders, the items from that were dropped on the ground, and these are literally some different things that he used to see in games. The blue lights are pretty good already. However, the different light, which is purple, a little different thing there. It ends up kind of having a poison effect that our protagonist there has on his body being removed. He then uses that clenching his fists. There the energy light gives power to our protagonist. With all that closed in hand, our MC ends up placing his fist on the ground, making the rest of the spiders that were around there fly high. Our protagonist, not only satisfied with that, decides to run in another direction. The speed energy that our protagonist just gained, there will allow our MC to break his record of 50 meters, then running full speed in this unknown forest. We observe in Su-PR there asking those slow spiders to keep up with his speed, but the moment he was running at full speed and happiness, a mist surrounds our MC all confused. He stops, but when he stops, that guy from a little while ago appears in front of him, But this guy who just appeared was quite disappointed with our prota since he was disturbing his ancestral things there, but our protagonist just killed some spiders and this couldn't be ruining his event, but he still asks that the immortal like him not kill these small spiders because he doesn't know the importance of these spiders, since he here ends up being pissed off with our prota. Not because he's killing the spiders for no reason, but because these spiders for our ancestor here are spiders he uses as food, and has been waiting for 3,000 years for these spiders to grow, so he can make a nice spider roast. Our hero here then is frozen with the new news that he discovered that this guy was eating his spiders, however being sent to this dreamland ended up being attacked apparently for no reason by this guy. There he used those poisonous mists of his, but even so, it wasn't enough. Our protagonist was able to dodge and defend himself from the attacks of this little creature. However, after he absorbed that light from that soldier from Anus right there flying, he ended up realizing that these punches from the monsters were getting weaker and weaker. So following this logic, he has a chance to win. But this was the most he thought, because that guy there, unknown, sends in his direction. Those two creatures appeared there up to our protagonist. However, still, following your previous logic, he could be attacking both of them at the same time and defeating both of them at the same time, preparing a punch there. We see some mysterious auras emerging around our MC, but this whole time, this ancestor there was calling our protagonist by a different name, but our protagonist has a name, and his name here was Feng Xia. And by the way, he didn't come from any sector. So commenting on this, he ends up punching those nerves that were approaching near him, punching, that there ends up dissipating quickly. The nerves are defeated, and the shockwave of our MC's punch flew in the direction of that ancestral guy. But instead of going all out against that ancestor, there he ends up thanking this ancestor of his for giving a lesson to our MC when he commented on this. Inside, he locked himself all up because he won by pure luck, but that one there widened his eyes and starts to laugh a little because for him, it was nothing crazy. He could have a much stronger supernatural power than his own there. So if he takes his life, he will be lucky. His greatest luck he wants most is just a greater power than his, to be able to get out of this place, to have that revenge against Rai Guan, the same one who sealed this ancestor here for several years or centuries there. But now looking more closely, the kid, he ensures that this boy was sometimes a bit dumb, but so he approaches our hero, approaching the boy. He then comments there that he will be making our protagonist much stronger, but he wants to make our MC his successor, hearing this coming from his ancestor. There a wave of happiness comes over our protagonist, because the ancestral master will be teaching our protagonist to have power. Then he will be mastering this technique and changes completely, just by looking once at their abilities. The first ability was the floating dream of 3 lives. Once learned, the soul of our little white guy here will be introduced into our protagonist, and he will be able to enter any kind of dream and will be able to be reborn. The kid, all happy, accepts the proposal to want to learn these abilities, and realizing that the boy was easy to deceive, we see the eyes shining of our crazy MC to learn these abilities, and so then knowing that the kid wanted to know these new abilities, he then will be teaching our protagonist, and so now we'll be sending him inside a dream. And when he kind of understands everything that is happening in there, he will be waking up as soon as he did that. He removes the fingers from our protagonist's forehead, and our big boy starts to close his eyes slowly. A mark of some kind of thing appears on his face, while outside we observe the happiness on our little white guy's face. While this here all in an unknown dimension, we observe our MC falling, but while falling he was wondering if this was his dream. So then he opens his eyes. Looking to the side, he can see several things. So these things, there started to circle our MC, but these things looked a lot like the attributes of light that our protagonist was getting. Before realizing it was the same, he extends his hand towards one of those lights that was there, so he ended up touching the end, and a light that was near our MC touching that, a light then started to shine on our MC. But from the outside, we observed our Branquinho. The kid was smart because he just added 12 traps in the floating dream of 3 lives, and then with that, His soul should be caught in these traps, and in the end, he will be taking the life of our MC, only that as soon as he comments about it, our boy sighs there, as an act of it not working our branquinho, then locks himself, and asks there if our protagonist has already woken up our MC, as only he also did not wake up, but also he understood everything that was happening in that dimension, with a smile. Already he gets more than happy knowing that now that this guy in front of him will be turning into his master, which means that now he will be getting quite strong next to this branquinho, the white-haired man. Then asks what he understood. He then explains that the 3 floating dreams have a total of 12 heavy levels, and with each level, you can still further increase your combat power. Combining the 12 powers, you can unlock the path to become a god Vel. In his mind, he says that the kid was smart, but he still needed to demonstrate a few things today at the moment. He needed to make some illusions to fool this kid, so since he already understood a little bit of the base there, so he should already be going to the world to get it right, where there he should visit his spiritual dimension. So our MC, understanding that this was an order, he will still be in front of our, then asks him to close his eyes, so it is done. When closing his eyes, he puts his finger on his forehead. A light arises from there. Our protagonist, with his eyes closed, we only observe him minutes later with his eyes open. But upon opening his eyes open in this different dimension, now he sees several cubes in front of him. Here he realizes that this was the supracube dimension. Already gets happy for seeing that his master would be testing him, but for his master this was already kind of rare to find a spiritual dimension like this to reach. Like in a dimension like this, it needs a lot of power. And however, as before, he already learned how to use the hack. He asks for our MC to come with everything from there and give his best blow. Our protagonist asks for him to relax, because he just understood this new power he has, and he still does not know how to dominate his strength enough, and maybe he could be ending this in one punch, but he said that this was not the original punch. This was just a primordial spirit, so he could be giving the most powerful punch he wanted, that he will not be receiving. And with a mocking face, he says that he was just a human, with some supernatural powers. He does not need to hold back as soon as he comments about it. Our protagonist raises his hand up, and he finishes his sentence to worry, but it was no use here with the face. Now surprised, he starts trying to understand what was happening. But after our protagonist raises that blue lotus up there, he just ends up lowering it on top of our had no way to react. He is hit squarely. Some explosions minutes later happen. After the explosions, our MC relaxes because he sees there that he ended up succeeding. He ended up kind of managing to learn his first strongest ability he has. But looking a little further ahead, he realizes that his master was not there. He then looks to one side and the other to try to find his master. But behind, we observe his master appearing as a form of spirit. Again, he gets already pissed with our poet because he managed to easily destroy his avatar, and this would already be bad. So he would need as soon as possible to take the body of our MC. But behind, he ends up saying that he was after himself. Our MC, our protagonist with a surprised face, asks him if he was okay. After that punch, he said he was. So that punch of his was very weak, his speed was very slow, so he still needed to give his best blow, because that was worth nothing. Knowing that his master liked to take a beating like that, so our protagonist gets happy, but before our protagonist could hit his master in a one-on-one fight there, he ends up commenting that his master was a nice guy because he was taking a beating to a certain extent, so that our protagonist could be learning his skills as quickly as possible. But now, knowing that his master was giving his best, our protagonist also has to give his best, so he ends up activating a new skill, Blue Lotus Primate. This was the most powerful thing he could be using, so several lotuses of that one that just appeared there behind appear above our little guy with his mouth open. He is very surprised by this. Well, he had nothing else to do. Those lotuses fall on top of our little white guy coming out of there in that place, a beautiful explosion. The explosion clears everything, but who is left in the game was our MC, who again was looking for his master. But this time he couldn't be dodging, so maybe he was hit full on. And if our little white guy was behind, he appears with the desire to beat up our MC. But before that, he wanted to be already taking the body of our big guy, since he was an ancestor, and he couldn't be staying there, taking a beating for free, like that. So he will be taking the body of our hero as quickly as possible and by force. And the man with white hair reaches our protagonist's head, and from there, by touching his head, some kind of weird things start to come out of there. But at the moment, he was horrified to see that this kid in front of him wasn't basically anything to be strong. So he still has a lot of potential, but he doesn't understand why the reincarnation of the ancestors there was being sucked by him, this boy. They're almost being completely sucked by our protagonist. We see our MC there in front. They're looking for him but not finding him. He turns around, finding the little old man there. Now our little white guy was shrunken and now very small. He was wondering why he was in this way. So our protagonist, thinking that this boy was unknown, simply picks up the boy in his arms and lifts him up. But our little white guy already thinks that all this that was happening was the fault of our protagonist. So already tired of the boy, he moves towards that forest. They here return to the beginning of everything there itself. But while returning to that dimension where it all started, the white-haired guy thinks that due to that type of subject that our MC did, was the reason for being returning to this form of a child. Since there, he ended up losing 3 types of ancestral avatars of his too. Due to this, he ended up kind of being expelled from that dimension where that they were. But this was no longer the main thing. The illusion he had placed on our protagonist also kind of disappeared. But Fanya asks the white-haired one some things. One of those first things was, if he managed to pass his test, the white-haired one, then irritated with our MC, simply says that he did pass, so he could already be letting him go since having 2 guys hugging. There was already very weird, but at this moment the young one there wondering and quite worried if by chance our protagonist was doing something towards him, like attacking him. Okay? But already ignoring all this here, we already observe our protagonist invoking other blue lotuses there in his hand. He asks his master to evaluate the power of his power. But while he was there asking him to evaluate his power, we observe in the background a paw of some beasts, appearing a kind of dirty dark shadow, there behind that dead one and out of nowhere. A dirty bird on the head of a guy with brown hair and hearts also appear in his eyes. The reason was already simple, because in front of him appeared a barefoot girl, and with a very large, robust there in front of him. At this moment, Fanya then shouts there that the girl finally came out our elder, then ends up pointing out some points and already spent 3,000 years in that dimension where he was sealed by that other guy. But after so long trapped in that dimension, this is the first time he manages to see a monster turning into a human form. But our protagonist does not care about his appearance. He then starts running towards him. He says that God ended up sending him this wonderful gift here. He will then be receiving it with all pleasure, and this time maybe he will be meeting his first love. But at this moment, when he talks about this, the brown-haired girl simply punches our MC in the face. After receiving this punch out of nowhere, our MC comments that this girl has a somewhat repugnant character, but she out of nowhere then ends up shouting this time she will be killing our protagonist. She jumps on top of our protagonist, but Feng Xia tells her there that domestic violence was wrong and this was not the right thing to do. Then seeing that she would not take a step back, he then ends up creating a lotus flower, and he asks her to retreat, because he will not be retreating either. But the girl comments that this here was already very terrible, and they are quite strong, and she would not even have a chance of being able to beat our protagonist. So for that, at this moment, the brown-haired one ends up creating some webs. But at this moment, our MC does not miss the opportunity, because when he realizes that she was creating webs, he thinks that she was a kind of Spider-Man. But our white-haired one asks him to stop saying these things because it was just making her more and more irritated, but quite the opposite. Nothing happened because looking a little at her, we see that she here out of nowhere decided to want to be running from the place where our protagonist and white-haired one were while leaving. She shouted that she would return. But still she was weak, so she needed to get strong. Feng Xia at this moment asks himself what she was doing, what she is going to do there, behind the dead ones. But the white-haired one here ends up kind of having some ideas. The reason was that our young man captured a nest of spiders like those, spiders from the beginning. And at that moment, she kind of had a vision of Crier getting revenge on our MC. But she couldn't, right? The white-haired one was just watching the situation. But when he saw the situation a little closer, he noticed that our spider there ended up throwing some things back, and she ran away as fast as possible because at that very spot, an explosion happens, and even the mountain ended up being kind of split in half there in the middle of this play, and now finally the valley forgotten by God finally reopened. And then, over the highest peak of the mountain ends up splitting in two, and then a portal comes out of it. From inside this portal, two people come out who came from another dimension, and the young man with lilac hair kind of happily comments that this was a logical land, and they managed to find quite something. But the girl in the background also comments that this was very good, calling the guy there, who just appeared, a younger mentor brother. At the moment, he also shouts that the ancient books also didn't lie, and he also comments that every 3,000 years, a certain portal opens and allows people to enter a kind of dimension where you have almost everything good to start life. But the white-haired man comments there that some people entered the ancient land, making our protagonist confused and wondering if these guys who invaded his territory would be like treasure hunters. But the white-haired one asks our MC not to play the fool because not even a superior or inferior creature would basically want to find treasure here. Nobody would waste their time in this dimension looking for treasures, because in this dimension there are no high-rarity treasures and not even other things, because in this dimension there are only some modified spider. And here at this moment, the white-haired man shakes his shoulders while commenting that 3,000 years ago, a good meal was eating spider meat, and at this moment he was very lucky. But Feng looks at him with a face that found it disgusting, and he wondered if this guy had lost his mind for spending 3,000 years trapped in a dimension. And our protagonist asks him if he would really eat that spider. The white-haired one tells him that food should not be wasted, and this was valuable to him since this spider here in hand-roasted was literally a taste of a well-roasted and well-done crab. But the young man was still surprised to know that in this world there are people who have this kind of taste. But our protagonist there, curious to know this, ended up picking one of those spiders. When the white-haired one eats that piece of spider, the white-haired one observes a Sang Z there commenting that really this spider had a very good taste. He wondered what kind of seasoning he used. The recipe was secret, so he doesn't tell, he just changes the subject. Our MC comments there that it would be good for the two of them to leave this dimension since being stuck here would not be a good idea. But while he was thinking of escaping this dimension, that spider girl ends up declaring that it was not worth it, so saying that she ends up grabbing those her foods that she had in hand. But Feng Xia wonders why she came back, since she would only come back later when she would get stronger, but when looking. For her, he realizes that she has already evolved what she wanted. But he and the white-haired one there comment that she was also playing dirty since she managed to stop so quickly like that. The white-haired one changes the subject since she ended up taking his food. They then finally launch themselves towards our spider. At this moment, our protagonist, seeing all this, simply grabs the white-haired one, preventing him from doing anything. But minutes later, our protagonist asks her something she just said. It was about the ancestor there who couldn't be leaking from this dimension. She finishes eating, and minutes later she responds, "He is sealed here only by a certain guy, and only that guy who sealed this white-haired one in this dimension can be taking him out of this dimension. But there's another option. Another option is to find someone stronger who is an ally of the white-haired one who can get him out of here. However, to get that person, it had to be an exceptional person. Our protagonist asks her if, to get him out of this dimension, it had to be someone surpassing a superior level, a kind of supreme. But to reach that point, he didn't know. So he wanted to discover how to do it. The white-haired one, irritated, already gets close to him. He gets really mad because our protagonist said something that left him quite surprised. but he comments that she doesn't know what she's talking about because the white-haired one managed in his life to reach the peak of his power. This strongest period was in the Shen period of the third sky, which is also 3,000 miles from the sky. But at this moment, Feng Xia was going to ask the white-haired one what kind of thing that was that he didn't know. But the white-haired one already gets irritated with our protagonist because our MC doesn't know the elementary things. And in the end, he just wants to try to become a celestial. He knows nothing and possibly wouldn't be able to. At this moment, he starts to comment on some things that, to achieve that, it was necessary to divide your spheres. But at every moment you evolve, every step you try to take becomes increasingly complicated. In this world here, where the white-haired one lives, basically you can count on your fingers how many people manage to reach the celestial bridge or the most powerful power someone can reach. The protagonist already begins to admire the white-haired one because he was one of those guys who managed to reach the celestial bridge, but the man comments that he didn't manage to reach the celestial bridge, but on the contrary, he is very strong. However, he managed to do this in just 1 year, and he managed to laugh in everyone's face for seeing that he reached the peak of power in just 1 year. But the spider, to break the mood, comments that this was in the past, and now he who is trapped in this dimension can't do anything anymore. But Feng Xia, feeling the elder's pain, simply hugs him, and the elder comments that this girl, when she decides to open her mouth, she decides to open her mouth to say some very sharp things. Even so, our protagonist asks his elder not to be discouraged because he helped our boy a lot. So he will be doing this favor for our elder. So he will be reaching the celestial peak, and there he will be freeing our protagonist from this dimension. But the girl there holding the toothpick in her hand comments that one and the other only know how to follow and in the direction of our boy, ends up throwing a stick he was holding in his hand in their directions, but they both end up dodging. However, that stick crosses the two. Crossing ends up kind of hitting those people who came to this dimension. A girl with pink hair hugs a guy there who was there with them, but the girl with pink hair comments that this guy has the chance to reach a certain treasure hidden in this dimension. Achieving this, he will be getting everything he wants in this world. But the other guy comments that their goal here was only to reach the Xanu Valley. While commenting on this, we observe from the side there that boy too. But he wonders what was happening since his sister there was behaving differently. However, minutes later, that stick thrown by our spider flew towards them there and hit their ponytail leader squarely. He shouts there that this was a hidden weapon that was basically thrown in his direction. But at the same time, the one who was holding that stick in his hand comments for him not to be shouting that since it would draw everyone's attention. But at this moment, Feng Xia observes them and comments that these were the guys who came from that other dimension. More from another place, we observe the one with white hair, laughing at their faces, commenting that they would be able to reach the kingdom of Carla, a goal of theirs, and they would be basically defeated here or something like that. But the guy with a ponytail wondering why there are people in this territory here since there couldn't be. But in the background, we observe our Pinky here. From there, she pulls from her dimension her sword. She then, after pulling her sword, already starts running in one direction because she realizes that the spider, there was evil and it was dangerous. So she throws a slash in a specific direction for also having attacked her master. She will be fighting hand to hand there with this spider. The spider then realizes that a slash is coming towards her, but she easily dodges. Our protagonist asks her to be careful. But then the one with pink hair realizes that this spider, there was basically activating a specific and hidden ability. Her ability allows her to call several spiders in their directions at that moment. Then the spiders start arriving in the direction of that group of those people. But as that one arrived, our little spider comments that she has a name. And her name is not Spider, but her name was Junie, something T. But the one with pink hair asks her mentor to be careful, because the same one there has already reached the stage of power that the same one there is reaching, so it would be difficult to fight there with her. The same her mentor asks her not to worry, because he has his own way, and so then ends up drawing his own sword from his dimension. So then her mentor starts running in her direction to start the attack in the background. We observe then our Pinky. They're supporting her master, asking him to finish off that spider. However, they're instead of attacking that girl, that guy, her mentor, simply ends up pointing the sword in another direction. Well, the direction was not our spider, but our boy Funya gets scared and alarmed with what was happening. Also there, if by chance Funya did not want to be already hurt, the girl will have to be obeying him. Otherwise, it will be getting bad for our protagonist, the situation. But Funya just murmurs that he was just a spectator, but the ponytail one comments that the Lord deserved to be called kind of like that. At the moment, he realizes that he manages the situation with quite a bit of skill. Since there in the background, we also observe our Rosina. She starts shouting there for those crazy spirits there to bow their heads to their master, but this superior of those guys back there comments that his method wasn't, I don't know, much superior than he should be putting into practice. But it was what he had to try to put because his luck is basically tied to the territory of Shanu, his old territory. So he ended up in the end making this fine decision. And we observed the two commenting that he had a fine speech while there he was commenting about some things. We observed that one with purple hair interrupting their chat, asking him not to try to see who she really was, that her real clothes and her own body there already reveal what she really is. But Funya asks for time because he wanted to say some things. He doesn't really know what she is, and he doesn't know if he should be acting that way too. He doesn't care much about people's chats. But he also doesn't like one thing, a sword being pointed at him. So not liking it, he just asks to remove it, but not wanting it, he just ends up flicking that sword. The flick was enough to break the sword in half. Right after breaking the sword of our little face there, he just wipes his hand on his clothes, apologizing for what he just did, but it was necessary at that moment. So Funya then throws that guy towards his comrade since here he shouldn't be attacking a specific person like our par OA. But there on the ground, we observe the ponytail guy asking his superior if he was totally okay. The guy then gets up. He says he was, but his sword in his hand was not. However, after observing that his gift that was given by his master was totally broken, we observe there then our spider commenting that our protagonist at that moment was much stronger than the spider herself. There then, it didn't mean that he would be defeating our protagonist. Even so, that guy with purple hair who until now little ago was thinking himself superior, ends up kneeling and comments that his family, someone from his family, was basically recognizing the power and potential of the people in front of him. And so then he wonders where our protagonist came from. But he interrupts him. He ends up kind of putting a type of gold bar over his head. After putting that over his head, he wonders there to them what level he has already reached. But the white-haired man comments there that his spiritual powers are still not open. So meaning that our protagonist... But looking at that brick, he realizes that our protagonist could be reaching the Reno de Tar right after commenting on it. Then he observes the reaction of the two in the background with their mouths open and wonders if this guy there was really the King Delt. But then we see the guy with white hair wondering what these guys were talking about. He asks himself what kind of point they had to compare something like that with his kingdom. But Fangs gets disappointed because he realized that 3,000 years would not be enough to sustain a civilization as it could arise and disappear at the same time. But cutting to the direction of that group, we have our Rosina shouting there that she couldn't believe those liars since maybe our protagonist didn't manage to reach the kingdom of Tai soon. Then that ponytail kind of reminds her that he has a type of the same brick as our protagonist. However, the same type of brick as our protagonist was a little bigger than the one he has in his hand. But to end the joke, Rosina herself said she didn't want to be talking to anyone else, so she ends up kind of saying that she would be ending the joke by throwing a talman at our protagonist, and that gets stuck on his forehead. At this moment, he wonders what that was, then turns to the white-haired guy. The white-haired man responds that it was a type of ceiling, but that didn't have much effect on someone who was on a higher level of tea time, so it means that our MC wouldn't have a problem. However, that Rosina pulls out a big knife, but our protagonist, in a rather lazy style, ends up removing the talisman from his face that she put on his face. Now he asks who here couldn't move anymore, since she said that talisman could be trapping our protagonist forever there. And now everyone really believes that our protagonist did manage to reach the kingdom of Tao Tai. But at this moment, our protagonist ended up kind of losing his humor, so he ends up punching her in the face. At this moment, her superior ends up shouting to stop doing that, but minutes after punching her in the face, a type of video ends up being broken, and from that thing, something much better emerges. Now she was basically much more robust than before. Then she says that the young man was very rude, and that gave her a little bruise, but Funya there doesn't believe what he just saw. At the moment, he was a little embarrassed by what was happening, but in the background, we see his colleagues who didn't understand anything about what was happening, and Funya, at the moment, ends up rubbing his nose. After rubbing it, he comments there that her dirty tricks won't be working on our protagonist because he, our protagonist, ends up feeling something rotten coming from her. But that guy with an F comments some things there. Everyone already knows about the insidious evil spirits that exist in a certain territory. While he was wondering, he didn't know the idea of why he was calling the girl rotten. Then our protagonist comments there that no matter the type of ability used there, he will be able to avoid any kind of thing. But also, even using that type of scroll, it won't be enough to beat our protagonist. Even using the best abilities, it won't be enough either to stop the kid. And so, in this case, she already knows that our protagonist has no salvation. She will simply be demonstrating to our hero some of her specific abilities, so in his direction, a piece of cloth-covered paper flies in your direction, and Sangia quickly ends up holding on to those ribbons that went towards him. After holding it, he comments that it was useless, and that it won't be enough to defeat him either. But all this time, Rosina didn't want to be fighting against our MC. She really wanted to be running away from our Dark One, yet even so, our boy does not ask her to stop running, because running won't achieve anything. At that moment, she ends up near a cliff, and facing this cliff, she jumps. After jumping, she comments that so our protagonist could, in the end, just remember her name while she was falling. Fia was just watching and wondering why such spirits were appearing here, and out of nowhere, also decided to want to flee. At this moment, our protagonist starts to realize that something was up. This is how we are going to end this video. But if you liked it, leave your like. If you want the continuation, leave your comment below. And remember that it's great that the lazy soul wants everything, but gets it nothing for.